This is a comic about a character that I don't really like who is from an era of comics that I don't really like and deals with subject material that I don't really like and is written by a writer who I'm kind of on the fence about lately and is drawn by an artist who I've never heard of. So yeah, I'm gonna love it. Howdy, I'm Kurt Williams, and today we're looking at issue 1 of Deadpool by Cody, Ziglar, and Rogê Antônio. Now, I've said a bunch of times that I don't love Deadpool all that much, and it's really because of what the internet has turned him into. It's hard to think of Deadpool these days as anything more than just a fourth-wall-breaking, irreverent machine that's only good for cheap comedy relief. And there's this whole army of Deadpool fans who think that because it's meta, it must be fresh and therefore good. But I have found Deadpool comics to be some of the most stale, empty-calorie comic books out there lately. My first experience with Deadpool was Daniel Way's work, and I know that he's kind of a controversial Deadpool writer because he was one of the first ones to cheapen the character, but the issues of Wolverine Origins where we have kind of a Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner dynamic between Wolverine and Deadpool were some of my favorite issues at the time. I didn't have a great frame of reference for the character, but here was a character who could do Looney Tunes type gags and also managed to be formidable against Wolverine, who's the best there is at what he does. And for 10 or 11-year-old me, that was pretty sick. And then after I read that about a million times, I had a few issues of Daniel Way's run on Deadpool, and I read the heck out of those comics. I only had like 6 or 7 issues in a row, but I must have read those dozens of times. I very vividly remember taking my Deadpool comics with me on a family trip to Niagara Falls, and I enjoyed those more than the waterfall itself. So, say what you want about Daniel Way's take on Deadpool, I think it's pretty good, and it's gotten much worse since then. So I've been really out of the loop with the character for a long time now because I was just sick of him. I tried issue 1 of the last volume and wasn't that impressed, so I figured it wasn't really worth my money to subscribe to it. But what can I say? I'm all about second chances. So here I am. And overall, this issue, I gotta be honest, wasn't that bad. I think that Ziglar's writing in this issue is much better than his writing in Spider-Punk Arms Race. He really did seem to capture a character that enjoys being goofy and ridiculous and irreverent while also having some depth to him. I don't know anything about what's been happening in Deadpool's life recently, but this issue does a good job of getting us semi-caught up. And it also does a good job of showing us how Deadpool feels about the things that have happened in his life. And he feels very convicted, which is really nice to see from the character for once. He just went through a breakup and he feels terrible about it. Now he's sharing custody of his daughter, who is a symbiote dog, and he also feels terrible about how he's been a bad father to his real human daughter, which is a level of conviction that I just wasn't expecting from Deadpool. So that was a nice surprise, but I will say that as the issue went, we kind of spent too much time talking about that. He really doubled down on his guilty conscience. It was like every page he's talking about how he just feels so bad about himself or what he's done. And that might be too much of a good thing. That's like some Peter Parker level conviction. I'm not saying don't have that, I'm just saying maybe wait until issue 2 or 3 to really dive into his guilt. The dialogue in the issue is pretty good. It's very well balanced between well-placed one-liners and real purposeful dialogue. One of my favorite jokes is when he says, "Henry, look out, you're about to run into this bullet." And then he shoots the guy and the guy falls off his motorcycle. And then Deadpool says, "You're not gonna believe this, but you're about to run into another bullet." And I don't know why that joke got me as much as it did. Maybe it was because we had so much time in between one-liners that when he actually got around to a one-liner, it was fresh. Instead of the rapid-fire, terrible jokes that every other writer has been using Deadpool for. It just felt good to actually laugh at a Deadpool comic instead of the usual, "Yep, that's a joke." His daughter, the symbiote dog, whose name is Princess, is an interesting character, especially for Deadpool to be able to bounce off of. My one complaint is that she calls him Papa so often. So often. Like every time she's talking, she's calling him Papa. And I think maybe I would appreciate that more if I had a better idea of what she sounds like, because right now she has basic white guy voice in my brain, and that just doesn't fit with calling somebody Papa all the time. So we spend a lot of this issue having action. Deadpool is a mercenary after all, so we want to see him going out and being a mercenary. And we have this cool motorcycle chase with teleportation involved scene, which is pretty good and actually has a pretty tasteful fourth wall break right before it. However, one of my biggest complaints about the issue is that it's just not that interesting to look at. Like, I'm happy that we're taking Deadpool a little bit more seriously in this issue than we have been for a while now, but it is Deadpool. You can have silly things in there because it's Deadpool and have plenty of time for seriousness. Like, instead of having the chase go through all these pretty much identical cityscapes, why don't you have them go through a carnival part of the time, or maybe maybe a child's birthday party or an ice cream store. You can have the same story that way, but it's a little bit more interesting to look at. It feels more like a Deadpool comic. At the very end of the issue, we're introduced to a new villain, and I think that the dynamic between this guy and Deadpool is pretty good. I'm glad that this is a villain who takes himself seriously, but also isn't corny and over the top. And then even closer to the end, we have this brief cameo of somebody from Miles Morales' Spider-Man, which kind of makes sense in this context, but really more just feels like a plug for Ziglar's other book. Because it doesn't really amount to anything other than Deadpool deciding he's going to start his own mercenary group, which he could have come up with a million other ways. And then the epilogue at the very end where he reminds his human daughter that she can contact him anytime is almost a little too mushy for me. I'm normally quite sentimental, but I just wasn't expecting that much sentimentality from a Deadpool comic. It felt a little bit out of place. But I guess I'm going to run with it. This is definitely not the purely annoying Deadpool that I've been avoiding for years, so I'll see where the series goes. As far as the art goes in the issue, Rogê Antônio, like I said, is somebody I've never heard of. I am definitely not disappointed by it. It's very solid art. The anatomy is there, the dramatic poses are there, the expressions are there, even through Deadpool's mask without looking overdone. I think that there's more style in Antonio's work than there is in plenty of other Marvel artists right now, but it's still not the most stylized. It's not the most developed art style yet. You can still see he's trying out a few things and seeing what sticks. This pose in particular looks very Larraz influenced. I know I talk about Pepe Larraz all the time, but he's really hot right now, so it would make sense that lots of young artists are copying him. But it's not only the body language of this pose, it's also the details on the face that he chose to draw, the way that the mustache acts as the mouth, and the colorist is the only reason this guy even has a lower lip. The shape of his nose, the angle the nose is drawn at, the way the eyebrows and the eyelids are drawn is all very Larraz. But the style is not consistently Larraz influenced throughout. He's still trying out different things throughout the issue. In general, I think that Antonio could use a little bit more vision for his work. Princess, the symbiote dog in particular, is an example of where he could have had a more specific vision. Plenty of artists out there would have a much more specific texture in mind when they draw this symbiote dog. I honestly can't tell what texture it's supposed to be. It just kind of looks like big shiny red dog that didn't get enough attention in the design process. But, you know, take my opinion with a grain of salt. I'm really not a Venom fan. I don't know much about symbiotes in general, so maybe this is the best that they can make a symbiote look. But all I'm saying is David Finch would do a better job. So overall, I was pleasantly surprised by this issue 1 of Deadpool. I think that I'm gonna rate it a 7 out of 10. I think this series shows promise. I think it's worth buying, and I don't totally regret buying it myself. Deadpool is still not my favorite character, and Cody Ziglar is still not my favorite writer, but both of them have gained respect in my eyes after this. So if you're like me and you've been avoiding Deadpool for years because you thought he was just so annoying, this is a good chance to jump on the Deadpool train. And if you read it, what do you think?